The girl uttered the sentence without hesitation, as if she had been carrying it within her for days, and as soon as she spoke it, something in the room grew heavier, as if the air needed a moment to adjust to this impossible idea, while her mother, still with wet hands from washing dishes, stopped in front of her, struck by a mixture of bewilderment and slight fear, that fear which arises only when a child says something they shouldn't know, something that disarms without raising its voice, as the girl, sitting cross-legged on the floor, repeated that a man clothed in light had shown her how everything would end, without drama, without tears, only with the quiet certainty with which a child claims to have seen a red bird at the window. The afternoon passed in a strange silence, and the mother, always careful not to frighten her, forced herself to ask where this man had come from, and the girl, with the same naturalness with which she spoke of her games, explained that she had seen him upon waking, standing silently by the door, illuminating the wood as if the light came from within him and not from the faint glow slipping through the curtain's gap, adding that he didn't speak with words, but with something like an idea unfolding in her chest, a gentle gesture that made her feel protected yet slightly uneasy, as if she were recalling something very old without knowing why. The mother tried to bring her to the kitchen to give her a glass of water, seeking a gesture to restore normalcy, but the girl stopped at the threshold and pointed to the old ceiling lamp, the one that had hung slightly crooked for years, saying that he had touched a similar one, but not in their house, rather in a very high place where the air trembled, as if each object emitted a faint sound that wasn't heard but felt on the skin. And as she said this, her eyes clouded for a moment, as if she were listening to an echo only she could perceive, causing the mother a slight shiver, not from fear of something supernatural, but from the deeper dread, the possibility that her daughter had seen something beyond her explanations. The girl took a sip of water, and in that simple everyday gesture, the mother found a fleeting relief, a fragile pause in the unease, but the calm shattered when the girl, without taking her eyes off the glass, added that the man of light had shown her a sky that opened, not like a storm, but as if a vast, silent rift slowly widened, revealing behind it a warm, almost golden glow that didn't harm but merely announced something no one understood, something that made the world seem more fragile. And as she spoke, a trace of nostalgia crossed her face, a nostalgia that didn't belong to a 5-year-old and left the mother frozen for a few seconds. The mother decided a change of setting was needed and took her to the garden, hoping the fresh air might dispel that unsettling feeling, and there, among the plants she had tended for years, the girl crouched beside a cracked flower pot, one they kept more out of habit than necessity, and said that the man had held a similar object, a broken vessel in which light gathered like water, and as she spoke, she placed her hand on the pot's sharp edge, closed her eyes for a moment, and took a deep breath as if something in that rough surface stirred a memory that shouldn't belong to her, causing the mother another pang of worry, the kind that comes when you fear something profound is emerging, yet you cannot name it. The house, viewed from the garden, seemed different, as if the afternoon light had taken on a paler hue, and the mother tried to convince the girl that perhaps it had all been a dream, reminding her of the time she thought she heard a river under her bed, but the girl slowly shook her head, with the quiet resolve of someone who knows they're not inventing anything, and explained that it wasn't a dream, that she had felt the hand of the man of light on her shoulder, not heavy, but just a light touch, as if he wanted her to remember something important, something she didn't fully understand but which left a sense of urgency, as if a message remained unfinished within her, waiting for someone to decipher it. The mother, aware that the conversation had reached a point where she could no longer feign calm, knelt before the girl and asked her to recount exactly what the man had shown her as the end of the world, and the girl lowered her gaze to her own hands, studying them as if checking for an overlooked detail, then, in a softer voice, said it wasn't an end of destruction, but an end of noise, as if everything people carry within them became too heavy, and the whole world would have to pause if only for a moment to sort out what had been left unresolved. And hearing this, the mother felt a mix of relief and unease, for it didn't seem like a childish vision, but an intuition of something adults feel yet dare not voice. As the light began to fade, a gentle breeze passed through the garden, stirring the leaves in the pots and creating a soft rustle that made the girl look up at the sky, as if searching for something slipping away, and the mother, unsure how to bear this unexpected weight, hugged her tightly, trying to convey a certainty she herself lacked, and in that gesture, so human and vulnerable, a silent microclimax emerged, the certainty that the story didn't end here, that what the girl had seen, real or not, had opened a new space between them, a space that would force the mother to confront her own doubts, her need to protect what she didn't understand, and the deep fear that her daughter's inner world was changing in a way she couldn't halt. That evening, after putting her to bed, the mother lingered by the slightly ajar door of the room, watching as the girl, instead of falling asleep immediately as she usually did, kept her eyes open, staring at a spot on the ceiling where there was nothing remarkable, just a small darker patch, perhaps from dampness, yet in the way she looked, there was something focused, an attention unusual for her age, and the mother felt unease, unsure whether to attribute it to the words about the end of the world or the possibility that something in her daughter's mind was shifting beyond her ability to keep pace. So she finally entered, sat on the edge of the bed, and quietly asked if she still saw the man of light. The girl slowly shook her head without taking her eyes off the ceiling, and replied that she no longer saw him, but still felt what he had shown her, as if part of that light had lingered in the room, in the corners, in the way the shadows gathered on the furniture when the hallway lamp went out. And she added that there was no need to worry, that the end of the world wasn't something that happened suddenly, but like a great weariness seeping into things, a weariness that began with the clocks, which would stop marking the important hours and show only those no one noticed. The mother shivered at the mention of clocks, for she recalled the old wall clock in the living room, the one that had belonged to her own mother and had been running late for weeks without apparent reason. But she didn't want to assign this coincidence more meaning than it deserved, at least not aloud, and instead stroked the girl's hair and asked if the man had told her his name, hoping perhaps to hear something vague that could fit any explanation, and instead heard quite clearly that his name was Jesus, but not the Jesus from the catechism drawings, not exactly, rather one who resembled light more than images, one who didn't speak in long sentences but with a silence that arranged things in the heart on its own. This response left her speechless for a few seconds, for the mother, though raised with religious stories, had long lived at a distance from them, as if they belonged to a parallel world that no longer aligned with her concerns about bills and schedules. Yet there was her daughter, describing a Jesus who wasn't the one from the sermon she'd heard as a child, but an intimate, almost domestic Jesus, who entered the house without permission, stood by the door, and spoke with the ease reserved for someone who doesn't yet fully grasp the word fear but touches it. And faced with this image, the mother felt something very old stir within her, a blend of memories and doubts she thought she had forgotten. The night continued in its usual rhythm, with distant sounds of cars, a barking dog, yet everything seemed filtered through what she had heard, so that when she passed the living room clock and noticed it was again showing a different time than her phone, her hand paused in midair, halfway to straightening a crooked picture frame, and lingered there for a moment motionless, as if she hesitated to correct the clock's delay or leave it as it was, as if she feared that touching it would confirm the coincidence she wanted to deny, until she finally decided to ignore it for that night and went to the kitchen, with a sense that time, somehow, was beginning to behave like an unwelcome guest. The next morning, as she prepared breakfast, the girl's father entered the kitchen, his shirt misbuttoned and his face sleepy, still unaware of what had happened the previous day, and the mother hesitated for a few seconds before recounting, knowing he was more pragmatic, someone who trusted simple explanations and problems that could be solved with patience and effort, not visions. But eventually, as the coffee dripped into the cup and its aroma mingled with the smell of toast, she told him, carefully choosing her words, what the girl had said about the man of light and the end of the world, omitting certain details that seemed too delicate, like the certainty with which she had pronounced the name Jesus. The father first furrowed his brow, then smiled with a somewhat strained calm, like someone who believes they found a foothold, and said that at this age, children mix fairy tales, stories heard at school, and images seen on church walls, that it wasn't surprising if something from catechism had turned into a dream, and the more attention they paid to it, the more the idea would take root in the girl's mind. But as he said all this, his eyes drifted to the living room clock, visible from the kitchen, and the mother noticed, with almost cruel clarity, that something in his expression changed, that the firmness in his voice wasn't as solid as he pretended. To avoid turning the conversation into a morning argument, they decided to observe her more closely for a few days, without asking direct questions, hoping the matter would fade on its own. But the girl, far from forgetting what had happened, began to weave small details into her routine, changes so subtle that only someone who knew her well could notice. She lingered longer at the window before going to kindergarten. As if searching for a sign in the pale morning sky, she touched the doorframe of her room when entering and leaving, always at the same spot, near a small splinter, And above all, she spoke of time as if it could be folded, compressed, or stretched, saying that some mornings passed too quickly, while others remained stuck in a single feeling. The first truly alarming moment came 3 days later, when the mother came to pick her up from kindergarten, and the teacher, a patient and attentive woman, took her aside to say that during an art activity, the girl had described a place none of the other children seemed to know, a kind of large square, surrounded by old buildings with iron balconies, where the pavement had a pattern of bright lines intersecting at a central point. A square the teacher recognized immediately, for it was exactly there, years earlier, that she had experienced a demonstration that ended badly, leaving a too vivid memory in her, an experience she had never shared with her students, the girl, or even many adults. The mother felt her stomach tighten as the teacher, in a hushed voice, explained that the girl had not only described the shape of the balconies, the faded color of the walls, and the central fountain with a faceless statue, but also spoke of how, at a certain moment, the air in that square became so dense that people felt they were breathing inside a sealed bag, and how some shouts mingled with a metallic sound, as if someone were striking a railing, a sound the teacher still heard in memory. When recollections came unbidden, one she had never mentioned to children. As they left the kindergarten, the mother took the girl's hand more tightly than usual, not to scold her, but to reassure herself that she was there, that she was still the same child who laughed at seeing a butterfly, and waited until they got home to ask where she knew that square from. But the girl, instead of responding with a made-up story, said that Jesus had shown it to her, as the world was fading, that the balconies gradually emptied of hanging laundry, that the shutters closed one by one like tired eyelids, and that the water in the fountain at the center of the square stopped moving, frozen in a tense silence that hurt her to look at, because she felt that in that moment, something important was ending soundlessly. This account, accompanied by the vivid image of the still fountain, became a new moment of shock for the mother, a microclimax that forced her to hold two incompatible ideas at once. The possibility that her daughter had overheard a description of this square somewhere and was repeating it without recalling the source, and the unsettling feeling that there was something more, something she couldn't name without her voice breaking, something tied to the way the girl, speaking of Jesus and the end of the world, seemed to blend the innocence of her age with a quiet maturity, as if without meaning to, she were touching an old wound that belonged to adults, not to her, a wound woven from guilt, fears, and decisions never spoken aloud. That night, lying in bed, the mother stared at the ceiling of her own room and, for the first time in a long while, felt she needed to find a meaning that eluded practical explanations. So almost without thinking, she decided to take the girl to someone who knew both the stories of faith and the intricacies of the human mind, someone who could help them distinguish between imagination, someone else's memory, and something harder to define, and this decision, settling within her with the weight of choices that alter the course of things, closed the second part of this experience with a new kind of tension. It was no longer just the fear of what the girl saw, but the fear of what the adults might discover if they looked into the mirror she, unwittingly, held before them. The mother needed 2 days to muster the courage to take the girl to the parish, not because she distrusted the priest, a calm man who had accompanied the community for years, but because she feared that turning the story into a formal account would make it too real, as if repeating it to someone else would tighten the loose threads of the experience. And she could no longer convince herself it was all a mix of childish imagination and coincidences. So that morning, as they walked along the damp sidewalk after a brief rain, the girl held a smooth pebble she'd found on the way, stroking it with her thumb as if it gave her confidence, while the mother walked with a lump in her throat, trying to feign calm. The interior of the parish was nearly empty, with only a few people arranging flowers near the altar and one lighting a candle in a corner. The light filtering through the stained glass windows had a melancholic hue, making the air denser and more intimate, and as soon as they crossed the threshold, the girl paused for a few seconds, as if listening to something only she could hear, a faint murmur that wasn't sound but rather a sensation spreading along the walls. And when the mother asked if everything was all right, the girl nodded with the same calm she had used when speaking of Jesus days before, a calm that now began to feel unsettling to her. The priest received them in a small side room, a simple space with a wooden table, a few worn books, and a window letting in soft light. The mother cautiously explained that they had noticed strange behavior in the girl, without yet mentioning the phrase about the end of the world, and asked for advice on how to handle the situation, but the girl interrupted after a few moments, placing the smooth pebble on the table and saying, with that innocent resolve that had become habitual for her that Jesus didn't want to scare anyone, for the end of the world wasn't a threat but a kind of closure, like when a story ends and the pages rustle as they close. The priest looked at the girl attentively, not with the gaze that searches for symptoms, but with one that seeks to understand the speaker's inner logic, and asked her to describe what she had seen, but she didn't recount the scene like a dream or a fantastical tale, but as something that had happened in a place where time didn't move as usual. She described a horizon that seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like a tired animal, and spoke of a silence so vast it seemed to hold many voices within it, though none were audible. The strange thing wasn't what she said, but the calm with which she said it, without drama, without a desire to impress, as if she were recounting a memory from a walk in the park. When the girl fell silent, the priest nudged the smooth pebble with a finger and asked if Jesus had given it to her, but she shook her head and said she had picked it up that morning because it resembled another he had shown her in the vision. A stone that, she said, was part of the floor in a place where light fell in straight lines, ordered, as if obeying an invisible architecture, and at that moment, the mother felt something tighten within her, for she clearly recalled a pilgrimage she had made as a teenager, where the pavement of a sacred square in another city had a similar pattern, a detail she had never mentioned at home and which now returned to her memory like a gentle blow, forcing her to rethink everything. The priest, calmly and without showing alarm, asked how the girl knew this pebble resembled the other, and she replied that Jesus had shown her that some things in the world are like keys that awaken dormant memories, that people carry small echoes of places they've seen without realizing it, or that their parents saw before they were born, and that the end of the world was related to this, the moment when all those echoes become too loud to ignore. The mother felt her breath quicken, not from supernatural fear, but from the symbolic weight of these words, which seemed to touch a part of her she had learned to silence. After saying goodbye to the priest, who advised patient observation and not pressing for forced explanations, they walked home, but the girl seemed more pensive than usual. Passing a construction site, she stopped to look at a rusted beam protruding from under tarps and said that Jesus had shown her something similar, a kind of metallic line crossing the sky as the world paused, not as a threat, but as a sign that what was broken needed to be fixed before the weariness of the end spread. And as she said this, she touched the beam's edge with her fingers, as if seeking a texture to confirm her memory. Upon returning home, the mother noticed the father was more serious than usual, seated at the dining table with the wall clock taken down beside him. He explained that the clock had stopped completely that morning, with no apparent mechanical cause, and that he had tried to take it apart to check, but upon opening the back cover, he found an odd detail. The hands had stopped precisely at the moment the girl, days earlier, had said Jesus touched her shoulder to show her the beginning of the world's end. He didn't believe in such precise coincidences, but he also didn't know how to interpret it without jumping to conclusions. The girl approached the clock curiously, reached out, and touched the still hands with her fingertips, then murmured that the house's time was tired, that it had worked too long trying to keep hours no one looked at, and that Jesus had shown her that when the end of the world begins, clocks would be the first to ask for rest. The mother restrained the urge to snatch the clock away, not out of fear she might damage it, but from the almost physical sense that the girl was reading something in it that others couldn't see, and this powerlessness pierced her with a mix of anger and sadness. That afternoon they decided to go to the park to unwind, and there, on a bench by the pond, the mother felt for the first time that emotional exhaustion was beginning to transform into a different kind of understanding, more intimate and painful. The girl chased pigeons, laughing like any child her age, but every so often she paused, looked toward the horizon, and seemed to listen to an inner murmur, as if waiting for something to manifest again, though she neither demanded nor forced it. The father watched her silently, arms crossed, trying to keep his doubts from turning into visible worry. As the three sat on the edge of the park fountain, the girl leaned forward to touch the water, and in that gesture came the second revelatory moment of the day. She said that Jesus had shown her a place where the water remained still even when the wind blew strongly, a water that didn't respond to the outside world because it held within it the memories of many people, unresolved memories, and that when the end of the world came, such waters would be the first to empty, revealing the bottom. With markings no one had noticed before, the mother felt a shiver run through her, for she immediately recalled the square the girl had described days earlier, with a motionless fountain and dense air, a memory foreign to the girl but profoundly present for the teacher. The tension accumulated over days found a gentle but inevitable microclimax when the mother, no longer able to hold back, asked if Jesus would return, if he had said when this end of the world she spoke of with such calm would come. The girl replied that no, he didn't speak of dates, for the end of the world wasn't a specific day, but a point people reached when they stopped listening to what they truly felt, when they hid behind haste or fear, and that Jesus only wanted her to remember one thing, that adults too must learn to pause before weariness left them without the strength to start anew. These words, simple and profound, broke something in the mother, not like a collapse, but like a necessary crack through which an uncomfortable truth seeped. She felt the girl was pointing to something that had less to do with visions and more to do with the life they led, with how they had learned to survive by running without thinking, carrying days heavier than they admitted. And as the afternoon progressed and the light shifted its tone, she understood that what they called the end of the world could also be a mirror forcing them to look at their own their guilt, their silences, their deferred decisions, and that perhaps the girl, without knowing it, was giving them the chance to open that space adults always feared entering. Returning home, the mother felt something within her shift, a change that was neither relief nor fear, but a blend of both, as if she had realized that what lay ahead wasn't a puzzle to solve, but an emotional truth they didn't yet know how to name. And as the girl went to her room, the mother looked at her with a new tenderness, aware that the story was far from over, but was entering deeper terrain, where she herself would have to decide which part of her life she was ready to face directly. Before the world's weariness, which the girl spoke of so naturally, began to catch up with her too. The next morning dawned with a pale light that seemed unable to decide whether to pierce the windows or stay behind the clouds, and the mother, waking, felt that the house's silence carried a different weight, as if the rooms were holding their breath, waiting for something not yet formed. She rose quietly, went to the living room, and found the wall clock on the table, its hands still and its glass slightly fogged, as if it had absorbed the warmth of someone's gaze overnight, and this detail, so subtle, caused a stab of unease she couldn't ignore. The girl appeared soon after, her hair still tousled and barefoot, holding the doorframe with one hand, as if needing a moment to orient herself before moving on. She approached the clock, looked at it with an expression blending sadness and acceptance, and said that Jesus had shown her that some objects grow tired, not from defects, but because they carry too much memory, too many hours no one wanted to hear, and that when that happens, it's best to let them rest, not force them to keep working, for everything knows when it has reached the end of its path. The father, listening from the kitchen, approached with a serious expression, perhaps too serious for a conversation with such a small girl, and asked if Jesus had said anything else, if he had spoken of the future or what they as a family should do. But the girl shook her head and said that Jesus didn't give instructions, that he only showed doors and left it to each person to decide whether to open them or leave them closed, and that the end of the world was neither punishment nor final sorrow, but a moment when people must honestly look at what they've stopped feeling, what they've avoided out of fear or haste. The mother noticed these words struck the father like a slow blow, one he tried to hide, but which was betrayed by the tension in his jaw. They decided to go for a walk to unwind, and as they walked along the damp sidewalk, the girl stopped in front of a hardware store where tools hung in an almost ceremonial order, her eyes fixed on an old hammer with a cracked handle, and she said that Jesus had shown her a similar object, not because it was important in itself, but because it represented a choice, to repair something broken or accept it as it is. The mother felt a pang of recognition hearing these words, for months she had carried in silence an unresolved disagreement with the father, a misunderstanding they had deferred so often they no longer knew how to approach it without pain. They continued until they reached the neighborhood's lookout point, a place where the city stretched beyond its own limits, with rooftops, antennas, and scattered trees forming an imperfect but intimately familiar landscape. There, the girl sat on the ground, dropped the smooth pebble she had brought from the parish, and watched it roll a few centimeters before stopping, as if she needed to confirm that the world still obeyed its small movements. Then said that Jesus had shown her a similar horizon, one where the light seemed to split into soft lines, as if someone were reminding the world it must learn to breathe again before it completely exhausted itself. The father, who until then had kept a respectful distance, crouched beside her and asked if this end of the world she described had anything to do with them, with their family, with the things they had avoided talking about, and the girl, without looking at him right away, picked up the pebble and held it in her hands, as if searching for the simplest way to answer, and said that Jesus had shown her that ends are not the same for everyone, that each person has their own end of the world when they reach the limit of what they can keep silent, what they can carry without breaking, and that the important thing isn't avoiding that end, but understanding it. The girl's words resonated in the mother with unexpected force, for she understood in a silent flash that perhaps she had delayed too long conversations that needed to see the light, decisions she had hidden beneath routines and duties, hoping time would resolve them on its own. She felt the father's gaze meet hers, and in that crossing, a kind of tacit agreement formed. They could no longer ignore what the girl, without meaning to hurt them, had placed before them, like a mirror that distorted nothing. Returning home, the mother decided to speak with the father alone, while the girl played in her room. They sat at the dining table, where the clock lay like a silent witness, and began to talk about everything they had put off for months. The invisible distances that had grown between them, the financial worries they had preferred to silence, the unspoken fears of failing as parents. The conversation wasn't easy, but it had an honest rhythm, a slow progression that allowed them, for the first time in a long while, to listen to each other without sidestepping uncomfortable truths or fearing the other wouldn't understand. As they spoke, the girl emerged from her room and stood at the threshold, not interrupting. She watched them for a moment with that calm seriousness she had adopted since the vision, then said that Jesus had shown her that the end of the world wasn't a day of fire or darkness, but a moment when people must decide whether they want to keep living without feeling, or whether they'd rather pause, talk, and allow what is worn to find rest or repair. Having said this, she returned to her room, as if unwilling to influence more than necessary what they had to resolve themselves. The mother felt something within her settle, not as a final solution, but as a deep and quiet understanding. The girl's vision didn't herald destruction or prophecies, but pointed to a human weariness, an emotional exhaustion they were living through without acknowledging, and that Jesus, or the symbol the girl used to grasp this mysterious language, was only a bridge for them to look inward without feeling they were failing as adults. That evening, after putting the girl to bed, the mother went to the living room and looked at the clock one last time. She felt no fear, but a strange, almost grateful stillness. She understood that the stopped hours were not an omen, but a reminder. Time, like themselves, could grow tired, could need a pause to gather itself. She left the clock on the table without trying to fix it and returned to her room with a feeling she couldn't fully name. A mix of relief and fragility, as if the world hadn't ended, but had made a turn that would force them to live more consciously. The next day, during breakfast, the girl pointed to the window and said that Jesus wouldn't return, because he had said what he needed to, and that it was now up to them to decide whether they wanted to keep listening to what remains in the silence when the world seems to end. The mother and father looked at each other, not with fear, but with a new respect for all they had been through, for what they were ready to repair, and for what, perhaps, they needed to let rest. The story didn't end with drama or grand revelations, but with a simple gesture. The girl placed the smooth pebble on the windowsill, where the morning light illuminated it without fanfare, and that small object, so ordinary and so meaningful, became the perfect symbol of the end they had understood and the beginning they were still learning to build. A quiet, intimate, human end of the world that didn't announce destruction, but offered the chance to look again, with more truth and less fear, at what had always been there, waiting to be heard.